Welcome to your deep dive. We're diving into SQLite and PHP today, specifically how to update records in your database like a pro. We've got our sources right here, ready to go.
Yeah, this is big stuff, really important when you're working with SQLite. You've got data you need to update, and you want to make sure you're doing it right. Nobody wants to accidentally wipe out entire columns, right?
Yeah. Oh, been there. Definitely do not want to repeat that experience. Not a good day. But before we even get to the code, something's been on my mind. Have you ever thought about just how vulnerable our databases are?
Honestly, it's something a lot of people don't think about, especially when they're just starting out. But that database security is mission critical. One little mistake, and your entire database can be compromised.
Okay, that's a little scary, not gonna lie. Which is why I was really relieved when I saw our sources kept mentioning parameterized queries. They sound like they're here to save the day.
Oh, they definitely are. The guardians of the database. It's like instead of just blindly taking whatever someone types into a form and sticking it right into your database, a parameterized query acts as a sort of middleman.
A middleman. Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more about how that works.
So imagine you've got like a template for a letter,
Yeah.
with the basic structure there, but you've got blank spaces for the name, the address, all that.
Yeah, totally.
It's basically like that. A parameterized query, it's like creating a template for your SQL query,
Yeah.
but with these placeholders, and then separately you fill in those details. It's like having a really good bouncer at the door of your database, Checks IDs, make sure that only the right information is getting through.
Okay, now that's an analogy I can get behind. Like, I'm seeing this line of code here in our sources. It says, query update student set name.name mark.mark where ed.id. Are those placeholders you're talking about?
Bingo, that's it. So rather than putting the data directly into that query, we're using those name.mark and .id placeholders. That way, if some shady character tries to sneak in some malicious code, it just gets treated as plain text, not executable commands.
That's so clever. I'm already feeling more secure, and we haven't even written any code yet. This is great.
And the coolest part is, it's not even that hard to use. Once you sort of understand the idea, the code itself is really simple.
Okay, well, that's good to hear because I think it's time we got our hands dirty. Let's dive into that PHP snippet we have for updating a single record.
Let's do it. Now, one thing you'll see is this term PDO. And it might seem intimidating, but don't worry about it. It's just a way for PHP to talk to a bunch of different types of databases, including SQLite. Think of it like a universal adapter for your code.
A universal adapter. Okay. So instead of having to learn like a whole new language for each database I want to work with, PDO lets me use my PHP to talk to all of them.
That's it. You got it. Makes your code way more flexible, which is awesome. Now, you'll see those familiar placeholders we talked about, .name, .mark, .ad, back and ready for action.
Right. Our parameterized queries in action, I see we're preparing the update statement with those placeholders and then separately like slotting in the actual values.
Exactly. And check out these little extra bits here. PDO param underscores str and PDO param ampersand int. And that's basically us telling the database what kind of data to expect. So text for the name, a number for the mark, keeping things organized.
Okay, so it's like labeling our containers so we don't accidentally mix up the sugar and the salt. Are there a bunch of other data types too?
Oh, yeah, totally. You might see PDO.param_bool for booleans, true or false.
Yeah.
You might even see PDO.param for literally nothing at all.
Haha, so many options. Okay, but back to our update. We've prepped it, slotted in our values nice and safely, labeled our containers. What's next? Do we just hit go? Is that it?
Pretty much, yeah. You execute the update using MED execute kit, and that's where the database takes those instructions we carefully put together and actually makes those changes.
Ooh, exciting. It's like hitting send on that super important email you've been working on, hopefully with fewer chances of regret later. But that actually brings up a good point. How do we know it worked? Did it actually update the record, or did it just ignore us? That's the thing about databases. Sometimes they can feel like a bit of a black box. We've sent our update off into the void. Did it actually work?
Right. Who wants to be left hanging? Luckily, we've got something called row count. It's basically like getting a delivery confirmation, but for your update. It tells you how many rows were actually changed by that command.
So if I updated one record, row count would come back and be like, yep, got one, all good.
Exactly. And if it comes back with a 0, okay, well, that's your cue to do a little digging. Maybe the ID you used doesn't actually exist, or maybe the values you were trying to update were already the same.
Ooh, that makes sense. It's like getting a return to sender on a letter. time to double check that address.
Exactly.
I can really see how this would be so important in the real world. Like, can you imagine updating financial records or like medical information and just hoping for the best? You'd need to know for sure those changes went through.
Oh, absolutely. You wouldn't want to be left wondering if that dosage change actually got updated. Which actually, that brings us to another really important point. What happens if things go wrong? What if something weird happens while that update is running?
Ooh, that's a good point. Like, what
Yeah,
if the database connection drops out of nowhere? That would be terrible.
exactly. It'd be like, like you're halfway through writing a super important email and the power goes out. But the good news is we've got something called a try-catch block. It's like a little safety net for your code, catches those errors before they become huge problems.
Okay, I like the sound of a safety net.
Yeah.
How does this try-catch thing actually work?
It's actually pretty straightforward. So the try part, that's where you put the code that could potentially have an issue. In our case, our database update. And if everything runs smoothly, great. It just executes as expected, no problem. But if there is an error, instead of like crashing the entire program, it jumps down to that catch block.
So it's like having a backup plan ready to go just in case things don't go as planned.
You got it. And in that catch block, we can decide what happens. Maybe we want to log that error message, or maybe we want to show the user a nice little message like, whoops, something went wrong, try again later. But either way, no system meltdown.
This is all making so much sense. I feel like we've covered so much in this deep dive. Protecting our database with those parameterized queries, walking through that whole update process, and even making sure that it worked and knowing what to do if it didn't. I feel so much more prepared now.
You're well on your way to becoming a SQLite master.
That's the goal. But you know what? There's always more to learn. And I remember that section in our sources about handling multiple conditions. So it's not just about updating one record at a time.
Oh no, we can get way more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
Imagine you've got a whole bunch of records you want to update, like let's say you want to give bonus points to every student in a certain class who scored below 70.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Instead of going through and updating each student one by one, you can actually use these multiple conditions in your SQL query, and it'll find just the records that meet those requirements.
Wow, that's amazing. So it's like a bulk update then.
It's kind of like a bulk update. In some cases, you might need to update like hundreds, thousands, even millions of records all at once. And that's where batch updates really come into play.
Batch updates. Now that sounds even more advanced.
They're super powerful, and they let you do these huge updates much, much faster. Definitely something worth exploring.
It's amazing how much you can do with Solgo and a little bit of PHP magic. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. We started feeling a little unsure about how to update records safely and ended up being able to do them securely, efficiently, like total pros.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And to our listeners, before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought. We've been talking about using these parameterized queries for updating records, but they're not just for updates. Think about all the other parts of your projects that might be vulnerable. Can you use those same principles, those same tools we talked about today, to make your projects even more secure? That's all for this deep dive. Until next time, happy coding.